What's up, gang? Thanks for listening to the Undiplomatic Podcast, the show with undiplomatic takes about the foreign policy scene. I'm your host, Van Jackson, and this episode is going to be really fun. I've been wanting to have a discussion about the political economy of movie making, and especially to talk about the writer's strike and the actor's strike that's kind of pushed pause on a lot of filmmaking nationwide, but not globally. And my guest today is the perfect Sherpa to kind of help us get a grasp on maybe how Hollywood works or doesn't work. He's a producer, director, editor, writer, and he's also currently on strike. Kevin Fox, welcome to the show, man.
I'm glad to be here, man. Anyway, my name is Kevin Fox. I've done some development work on adaptations for video games, a bunch of IP. A lot of it's in the dark, and that's something I'll be going into. Currently, the strike I'm working at the game studio Mischief. Video games are not covered under WGA rules. Oh. That's a completely separate category, not even unionized. So that's what I've been doing to kind of keep my my income going to this thing. But in addition, but I can talk about, I've done work on shows as crew on shows like Westworld, Animal Kingdom, and a bit on Drunk History, actually.
That's funny. So I assume, I actually don't know for sure, but do you live in LA?
I do live in LA. Technically, I live in Torrance, which is just south of LA.
Nice, yeah. I'm from LA originally, and when I was a kid, I actually lived in that shitty apartment complex in Reseda that Daniel LaRusso lived in The Karate Kid. And so,
oh, really? That must have been a trip. I remember I actually watched, I forgot the name of it. It was a Dustin Hoffman crime movie from the 1970s where he's a con trying to go straight. And I remember I went to the New Beverly Cinema, and I kind of had an existential crisis when I realized that the shitty apartment that he got after he gets out of prison was my old apartment.
That's funny.
When I first moved to LA.
Man. So you know this, but for the audience's sake, I discovered you because of this epic tweet thread you had about the movie industry that kind of went viral, and I'll link to it in the show notes, even though we're going to expand on a lot of it here. It was clear from that thread that you understood the industry at a level that I just totally don't. And there was so much in the sort of hot take that was worth teasing out further, but it was really the first time I'd seen anybody talk about the economics of film in a way that had a kind of foreign policy angle. You brought in the role of the state. It was really smart, which you can't say about a lot of stuff on Twitter. So I kind of want to explore that whole area a bit, but the best entry point for that might actually be the thing that we're all living through right now, or LA's living through, right, which is the WGA and SAG strikes, Writers Guild of America and Screen Actors Guild, right? So can you explain what the strike is, what the WGA's demands are, people who know politics but they're not tracking the strike closely, or maybe aren't in the entertainment industry? What should they know?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of the finer points, which I actually suggest that a lot of people actually look at the actual official WGA website, because they're able to go into it a little bit more than I am. But I'm going to give everyone a kind of a brief rundown. There are a couple of major concerns. A lot of this is the fact that a lot of stuff that was kind of left on the table in the 2008 strike never got properly addressed. That includes a lot of the stuff with streaming. Netflix was kind of allowed to not provide residuals and kind of undercut a lot of people by claiming that it's new media. And now in 2023, we are seeing them regularly put out $200 million movies. So the claim that they are new media and are just, oh, we're still growing, doesn't really hold water anymore. Yeah. That's actually one of the reasons why these budgets are so inflated, because they have so much up front, because they essentially have to do that. Otherwise, actors won't sign on, because they'll be like, well, either you got to pay me $10 million up front if you're not going to give me any residuals. But anyway, that's a major concern, because a lot of the streamers kind of operate the same thing with that. Another thing is that there's been a lot of other factors in this. You see a lot of the CEOs bring in AI, and this has been something that a lot of people wised up, because basically in 2008 strike, a lot of them were with streaming, it's oh, don't worry about it, it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. And then in 2023, everyone's worrying about pretty much the new state of things that has been created by the thing that we were told not to worry about. And basically, all the producers are basically like, when it comes to AI, oh, don't worry about it. And we're like, you said that last time. And look how things turned out. We're not trusting you on this front. But basically, a major concern is not that necessarily writers are going to be replaced, but they're essentially going to try to get around all these copyright things. Because I'm sure that a lot of the viewers, and you have been following the cases where basically a lot of U.S. judges have ruled that things that have been wholly created from artificial intelligence are not eligible for copyright. Well, a major concern a lot of people have is essentially writers being brought in after the fact to essentially do a quote unquote human pass on an AI written script to bring it up to snuff. And that actually cheats out a lot of these writers of their original script fees. It effectively cuts out a major step with a major payday out of the entire process.
This is Harry Braverman wrote this book a long time ago, Labor Monopoly Capital. And he talked about there's this tendency toward de-skilling of workers. And it sounds like that's what
Absolutely.
AI is for the creative writers. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of journalists have kind of it's not my place. I'm not a journalist, but a lot of journalists have correctly pointed out that essentially what tech and a lot of these companies are trying to do is the same stuff that got done to journalism over the past couple of years. Like one of my close friends, William Kuchenberg, he used to write for Cracked and like a bunch of online magazines. But as a result of kind of like AI coming in, a lot of those jobs essentially got skilled because they no longer got saw as like skilled writers. But before that entire process, before that kind of like that mass killing of those jobs, there was this entire devaluing of labor that happened, where like, you used to get paid like a decent thing. You could write 2 articles and essentially be set for a month. But essentially what happened was like they started lowering those fees more and more and more. And now they just completely gutted a lot of these jobs, but not to great effect. If you actually look at the response to a lot of these AI written articles, it's just been like they flat out get a lot of these details wrong.
Yeah, that's bad.
Yeah, but another thing that's stepping away from AI for a moment, another issue here is one of the things that kind of happened with the advent of streaming was mini rooms. Essentially, it's basically like you have about like 46 writers that involved in a season. But effectively, like they get in a room for a month, they break the entire story of the season. They fire about like 4 out of those 6 writers, or like 2 out of those 6 writers, or even like 3 out of those 6 writers. After those 2 months, and effectively get the last writer to write all the rest of the scripts for the show. You got a lot of people that are running themselves ragged doing this because secondary, it's not just writers write. They're not just guys who sit behind it on a keyboard and type out a script. A lot of the time, writers are brought in on set because sometimes you'll just run into a problem on set. It's a logistical problem, and then you have to figure out what are the changes that we can make that can affect the story. Last year, I produced a short film with Lee Shorten called Happy Traveler. I was the writer and the director on that. And a lot of the changes that we made to the script were on the day due to us recognizing story issues, due to us having a location fell through, and ways to completely do it. Like I completely changed a major scene of that script upon seeing a location and realizing that I didn't need the 3 extra actors I had originally planned.
So you need to when you're producing a show traditionally, you need a showrunner who is the lead writer, and you need a writer's room who is their team, who's brainstorming, making the magic or whatever. And the mini rooms breaks up this.
Yeah, because effectively, and this is something I'm working on with Mischief. I can't go into details because it's NDA, but I can kind of at least describe the process. But effectively, the entire purpose of a writer's room is to kind of reduce individual cognitive load on each writer. And that actually allows a lot of the other details that one writer working on the script might miss to kind of come through. It also means that because you have that instant feedback, you're actually getting a better version of that draft finished. And while you might see this kind of argument that, oh, it's like reducing authorial intent, it's like, well, first of all, that's the duty of the showrunner. The showrunner's duty is to keep all of those writers on track and within the kind of the confines of the tone of the show. And it's just like, that's just managing people. That's part of the job of showrunner. It's not like you're going to have these two other writers like come into something like let's say Mindhunter and then want to turn it into Desperate Housewives. Like, that's just not something that happens unless like a showrunner got replaced.
Okay. So the writers.
That was a take I saw on Twitter a couple times, so I just want to kind of address.
Yeah, no, that's really
that.
good. And like, my audience it's hit and miss how clued in they are to what's going on with the strike. So this is important. So I think a lot of people have this romantic impression that like if you're a screenwriter in LA, you're living the good life. I've seen some pretty appalling stories that sort of convey how precariously most people are in this industry. And you can have like a box office movie on your resume and then still not be able to make rent, And so I guess that leads to a question of like, what's economic life like for creative workers? Like, how do you get gigs? What is pay structured like? You talked about the mini rooms already. What is employment like?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, I'm lucky that with this game, I'm under contract until like essentially 2025. So that's good. That's long-term employment. But I'm about to tell you why I'm doing this and still keeping a foot in the industry. Effectively, the thing that you have to understand is that a majority of your work as a writer, unless you're staffed on a regular like 24 episode season, like the guys that work on NCIS, like your standard procedural, those guys have regular employment. It's basically like you're kind of, unless some kind of major shakeup happens in the writers' room, you're probably going to come back next season as long as you're kind of like performing to standard.
Regular employment as long as the show keeps going. Yeah.
Right. That's kind of how it works with television. Okay. Features is kind of a different beat, and a lot of people, especially if like they're developing TV shows or features, can kind of run into a problem that I ran into in my career, which is effectively you get kind of trapped in the dark doing a lot of the work that goes behind the scenes of a lot of productions before the public even hears about it. I've worked on several prominent pieces of IP for major production companies that never saw the light of day, and I was not paid for. That is effectively how a lot of the work goes. You're kind of working on this stuff on spec, expecting a payday if it gets greenlit. But factors beyond your control, be they, the executive you're directly working under got let go, be it one of the companies that you were talking to had a complete change of heart about who they want to handle things after a game that was licensed on one of their IP completely collapsed. Like all of that stuff are factors that can completely kind of stall a career in the water when they're in that period. And, then there's also times where you get brought in to do rewrites. Sometimes you're brought to do rewrites on spec. And then you don't get paid because
there's a lot of unpaid labor here.
Yeah, there is an insane amount of unpaid labor that goes around, and that's actually one of the major sticking points of the WGA rule is that like legally they're not supposed to do that according to the contract. And one of the things that the WGA is trying to push for is to make it so, hey, you're like you will get in trouble if you do that, but effectively. The producer guild was like, well, we'll talk to our producers and we'll see what we can do about that. But, we don't have to have these hard rules. But, if anyone's ever worked with any kind of company and any kind of labor negotiation, that when they do that, they have every intention of violating that rule.
Man, that sounds pretty insecure.
Anyway, yeah, but like just to illustrate it, like I lost a major gig in 2021. And effectively, a lot of 2022 was kind of spent in the wilderness while my current gig was spinning up. While I was also doing like a lot of development work, I was doing stuff like data entry, temp work. Like I was writing for a mobile game. I was doing Uber Eats driving. Like that's pretty par for the course with a lot of writers that are working out. That's actually one of the reasons why the Writers Guild is so strike is that we've already had these periods of unemployment where we have had to seek alternative forms of employment.
So you could get I mean, 100K, let's say, for which is way higher than the industry minimum, right?
Mm-hmm.
You
I believe, yeah. If you're getting a feature script, it's like I believe it's like around 75K minimum, but there are certain factors that you have to take into account. One is taxes. Two is
too, right?
agent, lawyer, and manager.
Hmm.
That takes a huge chunk out of that 100K.
And then what you're left with has to keep you afloat through periods of in the wilderness, through periods of uncertainty, or you don't get paid for some labor that you thought you were going to get or something. So like it's your cushion too.
Yeah, I mean, that was a thing I got taught when I did crew work, was effectively, it's like, you may look at your paycheck and you may think, oh, this is an insane amount of money, but it's like you also got to think into it, like you don't know where that next paycheck is coming from. So it's like, that was the thing that I saw taught to grips, was basically like, yeah, don't go buying that new jet ski just because you get like a major paycheck from doing all the overtime on like Westworld or whatever.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. It's there's something romantic about the life of a creative, but like the economics of it are pretty rough. I mean, it's at best uncertain.
Right. A lot of, like, to be honest, like a lot of us are here because we're dreamers and we're like a little bit kooky.
Mm-hmm.
It's like one of the things that frequently gets doled out to newcomers is just like, can you do anything else besides this? Is one of the first questions that is asked.
Yeah.
Because it can be extremely rough. But it's just definitely like that kind of uncertainty is one of the things that the WGA is trying to fight against. It's one of the reasons why they're trying to aim for minimum room sizes, because addition to that economic uncertainty, there's an entire crash that's coming up when it comes to talent, because you're having entire generations of writers that came up during the streaming era that never got to work set.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that if they're going to have to be a showrunner, they do not know how to manage the practicalities of actually filming.
Oh, see, I was going to ask about this. Like, I listened to a bunch of screenwriter podcasts just for, shits and gigs, and I've heard all of them at different points talk about how coming up as a writer used to be very different, like especially pre-streaming. What was different in before times compared to now?
Well, effectively, it was like there was kind of a growth program. Like, this is something I kind of ran into when I was starting, because I'm younger. Like, I moved to LA in 2015, like after I graduated college, and one of the things that just kept on happening was just like, I tried following the advice of people that came before, and effectively I found out it no longer worked. Everything had gotten so regimented and streamlined that, like, the old advice of like take a job, any job, often wouldn't work, because you'd often get seen as just your role and not for any kind of potential that you had. Like, you take a job doing like security on a film program, you just get seen as just the security. But like, there was and as a result of this, there was this entire issue that came up a couple years ago with a lot of the support staff that, like, you think that, oh, you get support staff, you're a writer's assistant, like eventually, like after like a year or two, you're probably going to like end up at the actual room writing a script for yourself. There were people that like had been doing this for like close to a decade now and still had not a single episode of TV under their belt as a credit.
So there's no mobility anymore.
Yes, and a huge reason for that was the advent of mini rooms, meaning that like a lot of these showrunners were asking for larger writing staff just to help kind of reduce the cognitive workload of trying to produce a show.
Yeah.
But in doing so, and a lot of these kind of cutbacks, it meant that there was no longer the avenue for growth that there used to be in the 90s, where basically like, you would have someone that like did a season of television as a writer's assistant, and maybe by the end of that season, like best case scenario, they ended up with a script under the belt.
Not so much anymore.
Nope, not so much anymore.
Man, okay. Pretty bleak. So we've got these behemoths like Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, Apple TV, Amazon, whatever, a few
Mhm.
others. Can you talk to me about the streaming business model? Like, big picture, how does it work? Does the streaming model make it easier to precarize creative workers in some way?
It's difficult. It's a very complicated response. Um, I, I I've argued and this is not coming from me. This is a take that a lot of other people have had,
Hmm.
that the advent of streaming has kind of led to a lot of stuff being reduced to just content. It's just reduced to, okay, it's just something that's going to be dropping a week. It's going to be a flash in the pan, and then no one's going to talk about it ever.
Yeah.
uh, I'd argue, especially if you look at like the actions of like what used to be known as HBO Max and is now known as Max. Have you heard that whole
That's a whole
controversy?
fucking separate story, but yeah.
Oh, it is, but I
Like,
think it's very emblematic of like the central problems here. Um,
what are you doing demolishing like a very established brand? Like, what was the logic?
I couldn't tell you. There's a lot of theories out there. A lot of it are people kind of looking at Zaslav's background in reality television, and a lot of people are theorizing it might be some kind of personal insecurity. Um,
Hmm.
Judging by certain things, I honestly think a lot of the behavior is because there's certain stuff that you can get away with in reality TV that does not fly in scripted, specifically because of our unions.
That's
Uh,
crazy.
for example, going back to that point, Max got in trouble
Max
because
being HBO.
HBO.
The new
Well,
name, yeah.
now it's Max is just the streaming service. HBO is
Yeah.
kind of a different sub brand. HBO still exists. It's just folded under it.
Okay.
It's a weird brand recognition thing. But anyway, um, essentially, hang on one second. Just a mini yawn. Okay, got it. Essentially, what happened was they decided that they were going to rope all of the credits into just creators. That led to a major problem that they still have not fixed, where screenwriters, directors, and producers are all credited under the same credit. According to the PGA, the WGA, and the DGA rules, you are not allowed to do that.
Yeah, you have to credit the writer as the writer and the director, right? Like, that's part of
Yeah,
the stat. It's part of how you be in the guilds in the first place, right? Like,
right, because an entire part of how you end up kind of establishing your career is that, like, oh, you worked on this, you were the director of this, you were the writer of this episode of the X Files, you were,
mhm.
you were the guy who wrote this episode that was an Emmy award-winning one, or you were the director of this. The when you credit all of the creative import to just like this nebulous concept of the creators, it makes it more difficult for someone to point at something that they worked on and have their actual contribution to that uh, actually matter.
Recognized, yeah.
Because it's effectively shoving everything into a pot and just saying, all these people worked on it.
Wait, so that sounds illegal. I mean, what is the state of play on that?
They agreed that they were going to fix it, but last time I checked, which might have been a month ago, they have not fixed it.
Hmm. Interesting. So how does the how so how does what is the economics of streaming? Like, how do the big streamers make money? Just from subscriptions, right?
Yeah, largely from subscriptions, though there's oftentimes like other kind of merchandising deals that kind of come into it. It's one of the reasons why The Witcher and Stranger Things are like such big cash cows for Netflix, because of all the residual material that comes out of it. It's one of the reasons why they're big on chasing franchises right now,
Hmm.
because of the merchandising as a secondary source of revenue. But when everything's established IP, with the exception of Things, which was an original concept that just blew up, it makes it very difficult for the next Star Wars or the next Stranger Things or the next The Witcher to get made,
Yeah.
because everyone's just looking at, okay, what already sold well.
And then that traps us in a nostalgia loop. because that's all we're getting
Yep,
fed.
exactly. We have been trapped in a nostalgia loop. One of my younger friends actually pointed out, it's just like it would be very nice if like they would have something that referenced something post 2000.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy. Well, so what's the incentive for like a Netflix or a Disney Plus to make like to invest a lot in how does an individual streaming movie make money if the revenue is mostly through subscriptions?
That is that is one of the key kind of questions to this. My partner Philip Bastien actually, like, one of the things that's being kind of fought over in this is everyone kind of wants all these streaming services to open up their kind of internal logs so they can determine how much money things actually made.
The data,
Like,
yeah.
yeah, the data. But aside from these kind of vague things of like, oh, X amount of like hours were watched in Ashoka, oh, X amount of hours were watched in like this Netflix movie, a lot of it has been very difficult to kind of ascertain. My writing partner, Philip Bastien, has a theory that a lot of this data might actually be inflated. And that's one of the reasons why they are so reluctant to open up their books.
Hmm. Yeah. It's like on Succession. Um, Interesting. Well, so that's a an industry in trouble. It almost sounds like. I mean,
Yeah, a lot of people have been theorizing that the streaming bubble was eventually going to burst, and that
mhm.
seems to be what's happening right now. Um, but like for one of the things that for streaming itself to be kind of profitable, it has to effectively be kind of a walled garden. It's one of the reasons why they keep on like trying to cut things off and try to keep things like kind of under the same roof. Um, but the problem is that like it used to be like a lot more profitable back in the day when it was like, oh, it's like Netflix is able to license all this stuff. But now that
Mhm.
everyone's kind of created their own streaming service, you have Peacock, you have Criterion Channel, you have Hulu, you have Disney
Paramount, yeah.
Plus, Paramount, like all these other networks. It means that that slice of the pie has gotten smaller and smaller, while the budgets of these things have gotten bigger and bigger because you kind of need to have more eyes on this thing to justify buying this. And
Yeah.
it's just not sustainable. I mean, that's stuff that's been said by like Zach Stentz, who was the screenwriter of Thor. Like a lot of other writers have said this, and
Yeah.
that tends to be like a prevailing theory. Again, that's a theory. I cannot ascertain whether or not that's true, but it
Sure.
would at least make it kind of understandable why they are so reluctant to open up their books.
Yeah. I mean, once everybody's operating from the same information, they have less advantage. I mean, there's it's the same. The playing field gets leveled in terms of bargaining to some extent. Yeah. Well, this sounds like trouble. There was an LA Times piece that I think you had read. We had shared it with each other.
Yeah,
And it was talking about how South Korean actors and unions they want residuals from Netflix. Netflix has a huge presence in South Korea, but it operates like an empire through like local intermediary companies, so that it's not responsible for labor exploitation in South Korea, and it's not legally required to bargain with Korean unions since it works through local companies. So as a first step, the Koreans are saying like they want to meet with Netflix, and so far Netflix is telling them to fuck off. Like they won't even meet, and it's hard for me to judge how much like leverage Korean unions actually have here. Um,
yeah, yeah. It's
Partly
it's
because of the
diff-
data thing.
Yeah, it's difficult because I mean, historically, South Korea has not been kind to unions, with the exception of like a lot of their artistic unions.
Yeah.
I mean, in the thread, I talked about how that's one of the reasons why they were able to fight off both Hollywood and the State Department to actually guarantee, their domestic quota for films,
Hmm.
which led to them being able to grow as an industry to the kind of the cultural powerhouse that they are today. But um, one of the reasons why I think that Netflix is kind of afraid of fighting on them is that like that was South Korea very specifically was one of the many countries that Netflix kind of pointed to with like, oh, if you don't play ball with us, we'll just go to South Korea and just start importing the next Squid Game or like the next, Sweet Home, the next All of Us Are Dead, like all these other like
Yeah.
incredibly well made Korean shows, because South Korea, they're kind of neck and neck with Hollywood in terms of actual production value. Like you look at a
Oh
lot
yeah,
of
it's
these Korean
very.
films, and it's just like this looks just as good as like pretty much anything out of like, any mainstream studio.
Mhm.
And one of the things, but like the problem is that like if they lose South Korea, they lose one of their big primary bargaining chips. But the problem is that those dominoes have already started to fall. France and Sweden already require Netflix to disclose its subscription data and in order to make residual payments, as it's required by law in those countries in order to provide adequate compensation to the actors and artists that work on it.
Mhm.
But South Korea, they did the right thing. Like they went the kind of the quote unquote cool Japan route of this. I don't like to put them in the same sentence because of all the historical
Sure.
background, but it's effectively similar. They allowed instead of just being kind of subsumed by Hollywood, subsumed by like Hollywood productions just kind of flooding their cinemas. They allowed themselves to maintain their own entertainment industry, and that's one of the reasons why you actually, I think there was like some study that came out that said that like Korean is one of the most sought after languages for
Mhm.
incoming linguistic students.
Makes sense. Yeah. I mean, so Korea, yeah, Korea has a standout industry compared to basically everyone except Hollywood. And you trace this to South Korea basically doing like an industrial policy except for the film industry instead of like manufacturing or something. Um, and so I guess if we're zooming out from that case study a little bit, Hollywood did not dominate the box office by accident is kind of like the implication, right? The State Department used the power of the state to enforce this like hegemonic position of American movies. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, the thing you got to understand is that while it was not a policy accident, um, Hollywood's dominance is kind of a result of the accident of geography. And this might sound insane, but give me a moment and I'll go into it.
Yeah, yeah.
World War One, you have you have Britain and you have France that are having these massively booming film industries with the advent of motion pictures and theaters. A lot of that stuff gets wiped out as a result of World War One bombings, all that. American films move in and they start to gain a foothold in that market. And then a couple decades later, World War II, same thing happens, except it's on a much grander, much larger scale. Meaning that oftentimes, and you'll read this in accounts of the occupation of Japan, like what's flooding these film, like a lot of these theaters after the war are all of these big Hollywood classics, like Gone with the Wind, your Hitchcock films, all that kind of stuff, like John Ford movies. That's
Mhm.
what's hitting the cinemas in places like Tokyo, Berlin, and well, not necessarily Paris, because France kind of tries to maintain their own domestic film industry, even in the result of the war. England tries to do that as well, but with a lot of the Axis countries, Hollywood's just moving in and scooping everything right up.
Mhm.
But anyway, that kind of creates a huge kind of stepping stone for Hollywood to kind of gain the cultural dominance it does in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And then with the advent of with Reaganism, and then into 9/11, you see the State Department getting a lot more aggressive with pushing it and trying to do effectively make it so Hollywood has to we're on equal footing, Japan. Oh, we're on equal footing, Canada. Oh, we're on equal footing, Australia. And then what they'll do, and this is something that my cousins in Australia who work in VFX and videography respectively have told me, it effectively killed their local industry, because essentially every time that there would be something about the size of Mad Max, and by the way, I mean the original Mad Max, not Fury Road.
Okay.
A nice little genre flick with like broad appeal.
Mhm.
That would effectively get shoved out and shouted out by the huge deluge in marketing material that Hollywood would spend in those territories. And then they would also buy out local screens, meaning that, like, oh, you want the new Star Wars? Well, we're going to have like 6 out of 9 of your multiplex screens devoted to just Star Wars.
So Hollywood has like bargaining power that others lack, and it uses that literally in like slack capital to hoard literally movie screens at movie theaters.
Yes, exactly. That's happened in Canada. That happened in Australia. And effectively, this is what Phil has told me, is it feels like if you're English language and if you're an English language speaker and you're not from the UK, the only industry that's allowed to speak to you from a cultural standpoint is Hollywood. And that's not a great place to be in, because you look at like in the 90s and 80s, you have in Canada, you have Cronenberg. You have Cronenberg coming up from like the Toronto film scene.
Yeah.
And he's doing all these horror films. He gets mainstream appeal. He comes to the US and makes a lot of work. Same with guys like Peter Weir and George Miller in Australia. And that allowed Australian filmmakers to kind of like hold their own, to be able to like get these massive movies made. You have Peter Weir make Master of Commander. George Miller still making stuff. He made Fury Road, now regarded as like one of the best action movies of all time. And it's a Hollywood production. It's these major things. But they're able to gain that foothold and that talent because they were able to get recognized for making these broad appeal films with cross-border potential in their own domestic film industries.
So it was important for Cronenberg to have, I don't know, like film grants from the Canadian government or whatever starting out. It was important for Canada to be providing a kind of like incubator for talent.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And Phil's entire take of it is that like a lot of the Canadian film grants go to like 4 people, and quote unquote, everyone's just kind of waiting for them to die so the next generation of talent can take over. Like, that's how bad it's gotten. And a lot of the production companies that used to produce like traditional Canadian content, like with Canadian production and all that, now effectively work as vehicles to funnel workers to major Hollywood productions. So that means that there isn't the avenue for the next Cronenberg or the next Weir, or the next George Miller. And that's not a great place for a domestic film industry to be in.
And by turning the rest of the world into a backlot for Hollywood, we create a structure that reinforces Hollywood centrality, rest of world periphery, margins. Like it creates this perpetuating imbalance where everybody keeps looking to Hollywood. And if you end up coming up as a talent in what part of the periphery, you feel like you're pushed into Hollywood in a way. Like Hollywood becomes like sucks talent from everywhere else. So like this is like a perpetual inequality problem.
Right. And I once put it this way. It's not anything about California that necessarily lends itself to good stories. Much like, Yankee Stadium does not mean that like the best baseball players come from New York. That's just where all the money is.
Yeah.
But occasionally I have seen from certain figures in Hollywood where they assume that like Hollywood's inherent supremacy ways that's kind of forced its hand to be able to put itself in that position. Like, you look at a lot of the Korean films, and I'll be honest, they're doing all the drama and they're doing a lot of the production better than some domestic productions I'm seeing here.
And to some extent, that's because South Korea, in this respect, they've told the State Department to kind of fuck off. I mean, like they're not conceding.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's fascinating.
But the fact is that Canada and Australia did not do that.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why their local film industries are so precarious. I remember with that thread, I had a former Amazon guy try to debate me in the message and be like, yeah, but some of the highest earners from all of these other countries. I'm like, yeah, but some of those highest earners came into the game and got recognized by Hollywood like often close to a decade ago at most, and 2 decades to, sooner, but like, like 20 to 10 years ago. What about the guys who are coming up now?
Yeah. Yeah. New Zealand's interesting here because I sit in New Zealand right now. They have
Yep.
there's like a national film commission, like a committee or whatever
Mhm.
that puts government money into subsidizing a film industry, but it's controlled by like a handful of people, and everybody here knows that it's like it's who you know, like to get the to subsidy money. It's because you're part of a good old boy network or whatever. Like,
That's exactly the same problem that Phil ran into in Canada. Is that it's
yeah,
the same guys who kind of came up in the '80s that keep on like sending each other money through the Film Grant Commission.
yeah.
That's one of the reasons why they joke that like, oh, we'll just have to wait for these guys to die before we can really start making
Yeah.
stuff again.
It's a soft corruption that this structure has wrought.
Yeah, and it's not ideal. Um, as I kind of highlighted in my thread, like I firmly believe that when you have this kind of entrenched power, and I think it's one of the reasons why, at least I personally believe that there's been kind of a downgrade in quality in terms of storytelling and all that. It's not only because of the factors that involve the streaming and the way they run rooms, but I've noticed that there's also been like a kind of institutional laziness that's come about.
Hmm.
Like, you see this with execs that don't want to greenlight like anything that's not an established IP because they don't want to have to like tell their boss that oh this failed even though like on paper it sounded good, and it's like,
Yeah.
well, it was based on this best-selling like New York Times book. It's not my fault it failed. Like that's the kind of like thing that's been going on. And then you also see this when it comes to marketing. It's like it's become this kind of far cry from what it used to be in like, you watch Mad Men or something like that, and you see like how they're able to like sell you on stuff that you don't need or don't necessarily like want. Now it becomes, well, it's not hitting our 4 quadrants, so we don't know how to sell this. It's like, it's your job to try to sell this.
Yeah.
It's your job to make people want this.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I don't know how much of this connects to like the political economy of the film industry, but why your comment just now made me think of it. Like, why did Marvel movies become the dominant genre? Right? Is
Okay.
there a relationship between streaming and superhero blockbusters, or is streaming something separate?
Well, I think it's both connected and separate because the MCU movie, it had its peak when effectively it was using those same tactics I described that were going on in Australia, where basically like they would buy up. Like Disney was infamous among like theater chains for basically kind of bullying people into do it. Like
Hmm.
one of the reasons for the death of the small town theater was that effectively that they would demand that like if you have like something like I'm pulling from my own like personal experience because I grew up near Grand Ledge, Michigan. There's a Sun Theater in Grand Ledge, Michigan. Disney would have demanded that they run the Avengers Endgame for a month straight on its only screen,
Huh.
meaning that as of week 2, it would be probably losing money.
Yeah, I never thought about that. Wow. So, okay. So how does streaming connect to that? Because
Well,
that seems disconnected. You're right.
it does seem disconnected. But what has actually happened is that MCU stuff has actually gotten a little less powerful as a result of streaming because they kind of overextended themselves.
Hmm.
um Eventually like they learned a lot of the bad habits of certain comics and effectively that they wanted to make it so everything is interconnected, which was cool going up to the Avengers, but like each of those was kind of self-contained and you didn't necessarily need to see all of them in order to enjoy the Avengers. But
Yeah.
now they're taking it like you open up like an old Superman or like not Superman's DC, wrong call, Spider-Man comic, it'd be like, okay, to see this, to understand the context of the events, read X-Men 132, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Effectively, with a lot of their more recent shows, and this has been a common complaint, they've been doing that. And
Yeah, I've
it's
noticed
actually
that.
led to some of their worst ratings overall. So, effectively, a lot of the MCU stuff works best when it's like these big event pictures, but they overextended themselves. So, I would actually argue that it's slightly separate,
Hmm.
but Disney's brand recognition from the MCU is one of the reasons why they were able to get Disney Plus off the ground.
That's a paradox. That's fascinating. So, I mean, there's a labor question related to this. Like, do you have a sense of how much practical solidarity there is between like WGA and SAG on the one hand, like the US unions and actors and writers, with the actors and writers of other countries, like foreign unions?
A lot of them see them as in the same boat. Occasionally, you'll run into someone who sees them as competition, but that's only because they're buying the Netflix thing about it. But
Mhm.
ultimately, the stuff that affects South Korea actually means that if they get what they want, the WGA and SAG are going to be in a better bargaining position to get what they want. Because
Because Netflix won't be able to do like an offshoring equivalent, basically.
right, it's kind of similar to the kind of. There's even been an example of this with practical effects versus VFX. It's not that practical effects is more expensive. It's that VFX was non-unionized and therefore cheaper.
Hmm.
That's one of the reasons why they had the big CG VFX extravaganzas. But those ended up being a complete mess behind the scenes because people kept on thinking, well, it's just in the computer. We can just change it whenever they want. Meaning that, but when they say whenever they want, they mean after Bob, our computer graphics programmer, has pulled several all-nighters and has put himself in the hospital trying to get this one shot to work.
Yeah. It's funny. So like the dominance of visual effects, the death of the small town movie screen, the dominance of Hollywood and the sort of like impoverishment of movie industries elsewhere. These are all the natural state of things that it seems like. But then what you're telling me, which is like true, is that these things are not natural at all. These are the products of particular decisions. These are the like the byproducts of trends, and it's like in policy design on some level. Um, and so you've denaturalized a lot of the like hellishness of the confusing landscape of movies here.
Yeah, like I think it's very telling that like once a director is able to get the kind of push towards practical effects that they're able to do, you see this with like Guillermo del Toro, you see this with like Christopher Nolan and all that. They try to push for more practical effects. I
Mhm.
mean, Tom Cruise is kind of known as kind of a legendary producer in Hollywood because he kind of understands that like what audiences want is they want to feel danger when they see the hero in a film. They don't want to feel completely disconnected from VFX. So on the artistic level, people understand this,
Mhm.
but unfortunately in C-suite, they don't because a lot of these people who are brought in, they're brought in from other industries, hedge funds and other. And I'll be honest, a lot of them don't even like movies. They just see it as a way to make number go up in their stock portfolio. Like I remember, I was shocked when I went to a major production company and I asked, and like the head of development there was asked, "Oh, okay, what do you watch?" And this is scripted development, by the way. She's in charge of drama, like and all that. She says YouTube videos and reality television.
Ouch.
My heart sank when I heard that.
Oh my god. Yeah. Yeah, from like if you're just a blood-sucking corporate monster, like if you're just data-driven, surely reality TV is like the no-brainer for you in the short term because it's like they cost so much less. You don't have to do the visual effects. You don't have to have big writers' rooms. Like,
You just gotta find people desperate enough to want to get cash and be on TV.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I'll be honest, like I kind of view that entire thing like a little exploitative. I inherently
Oh yeah, of
believe that
course.
by its nature it is,
Yeah.
but like they make it a lot, and the advent of reality television was actually in response to the 1988 Writers Guild strike.
All right, make what's that connection?
Okay, so the Fox at the time was the new network. They were starving for content when the 1988 strike happened. They didn't really have a lot of options, but some enterprising producer decided, what if we just get some cameramen and we get them to follow some cops around? And just thus the show
Oh,
Cops
that's
was born.
fuck. That's crazy.
Yes,
Wow. Um, you
it's
mentioned
weird how much is overlaps with just the Union history.
yeah, yeah. Man, history turns on unions. You mentioned earlier, like you believe that stronger foreign film industries would force America to make better products. Maybe we wouldn't be so locked into like just Marvel. Um, can you talk about why you think that's the case? Like even in your Twitter thread, you mentioned something about like a '90s action movie template.
Yes. So what I mentioned there was specifically that a lot of the kind of like you watch like a Michael Bay movie from like the 1990s, like you watch Bad Boys or you watch The Rock, and you see like when they're like firing guns and like everything is flying apart, like you feel the impact of every
Yeah,
shot. Do you know where he's lifting that from?
tell me, John Woo.
John Woo, exactly. Like a lot of the visual dynamism of 1990s action movies is directly influenced by Hong Kong action cinema, where it's just like not only like great fight choreography, but also like when a stunt happens, you believe it's real because like they're shooting it practically.
Hmm.
They're doing like the whole like they're gonna do a gunfight, but everyone's diving through the air in ways that would get you killed in reality because
Yeah.
it's not about reality. It's about selling to people the idea of the action. And then around 2001, The Bourne Identity comes out. That is a massive hit. A great movie, by the way, but it inspires this entire trend where because it comes out at the advent of like digital editing. So people think, oh, I could just shoot all this footage and I'll just edit it in a way and that I'll have a complete action scene. So that kind of causes this downward trend in a lot of the visual quality of a lot of action. As a result of a lot of people relying a little too heavily on digital editing and digital
Hmm.
cameras, which reaches its absolute nadir. With I'm pretty sure some of your listeners have seen this. There's a shot in a certain movie of Liam Neeson climbing a fence that uses 14 different cuts. It is utterly incoherent. That is
What?
the absolute nadir of that kind of editing. But do you know what came out that same year as a response to that trend?
No, what?
John Wick. Now, John Wick was influenced heavily by the stuff that Gareth Evans was doing in Indonesia with The Raid and The Raid 2. Like, those had come out 2 years before. But in interviews with the directors, do you know what else they were inspired by? The
No.
narrative minimalism of Jean Pierre Melville, his crime films from the 1970s from France.
Hmm.
So they were inspired by that. And they were inspired by Indonesian and Korean action cinema and the way that they held on these shots and they made it very clear what was happening as opposed to just try to make it an incoherent mess to kind of sell you on the, oh, this is dangerous. And in doing so, they created the current trend in action, which is like very John Wick style, clear action, long takes, like, we're trying to impress you again. We're not trying to cheat you. We're trying to make you
Yeah.
feel like this is actually happening. And now we have a 20-minute long take fight sequence in Extraction 2.
So some of the or a lot of the innovations that we see or that we're impressed by in Hollywood filmmaking is a response to or inspiration from foreign film industries, from others doing it first, doing it better.
Right. A lot of it is.
Yeah.
I remember a while back, I had a discussion with a certain writer, and I was talking about like the quality of like a lot of the overseas film, and it's like how generally good they are, but Hollywood's. And he responded to me, "Hollywood's still king," and I'm like, "Why do you believe that?" And he's just like, "Well, we invented film." That's not true. The first feature film was Australian. I believe it was about Ned Kelly. That is the first ever feature film. And a lot of our editing terminology comes from the Soviet Union with Vertov and
Hmm.
Eisenstein. And like pretty much a lot of the stuff that we're doing is from just all sorts of filmmakers all over the world. But overall, I think that this mythology has been kind of created in recent years about Hollywood's total dominance, which, as I mentioned, is a result of complete geographic flukes.
Yeah. Wow. Um, I have like a speculative parting question or like a big picture way to sort of wrap this up. Um, how do you see the future of the movie industry you know, full stop. Like, is streaming a viable model long term? Like, what do you, what should we be looking at trends wise?
Yeah, streaming is kind of a mixed bag right now because it's kind of hard to tell how valuable it is long term. There's certain behaviors by the studio that kind of indicate that it might not be as viable as they thought.
Mm-hmm.
You're seeing Disney Plus actually start releasing a lot of its shows on 4K, which kind of gives credence to the theory that they kind of realize that it may not be viable long term, and we might be seeing a return to actual physical media.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, you're already seeing kind of a degradation that used to happen. If you look for any film made prior to 1990, you may run into difficulty finding it. Just the other night, I was trying to look for William Friedkin's To Live and Die in LA. Could not find it on any streaming
No
service.
way.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I was looking for Strange Days the other day, the James Cameron one, and in New Zealand, I couldn't find it on any of the platforms. I think in the US it's on like one thing, but even on like Apple TV, it's not here.
Yeah, like that's a like like To Live and Die in LA wasn't even available for rent for
That's a
through Amazon or
classic.
something.
Yeah.
Like yeah, and like that kind of degradation we're kind of seeing often, and like a lot of it I think got kind of spurred by the kind of tax holding that happened with Zaslav. Zaslav kind of opened a Pandora's box in regard to bad business practice, where they're basically like, yeah, I know that we made this thing and it was successful, but we're going to claim that it's not successful, and then we're going to write it off so we can save money on our taxes.
Wow.
Yeah, but like that kind, I don't know if that is some kind of like weird thing that's been going on with like a lot of these businesses, but um, the fact that they're relying on this kind of lends credence to like this is not the behavior of someone making rational decisions with a company.
Yeah.
This is the behavior of someone that might be in dire financial straits.
Or like the Batgirl, you film Batgirl and then you
Exactly.
can it before it ever releases. Like, but you've got the shit in your
Exactly.
hands. Like, yeah.
Yeah, like there's a lot of things that kind of indicate that behind the scenes you might be seeing like a lot of issues there. I think that streaming is going to exist simply because there are times where people just want to be able to sit down and watch a movie at the end of the work, and like it's a great delivery system. I think that you might see a shrinkage in original content, which not great for a lot of writers, but ultimately might result in a healthier, more long-term industry.
Mm-hmm.
There's stuff that you heard about with guys like Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, where they talked about the kind of movies that they used to make anymore weren't viable because secondary purchases outside of the theater would have like made it viable. So
Yeah.
meaning that even if it didn't make all of its money from the theater, it was making all the secondary money from DVD sales and online purchases.
That's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's grim. I mean, do you anticipate a kind of consolidation of the streamers? Because right now we've got this proliferation.
Yeah, I think that you're probably going to see a lot of consolidation. Personally, I believe Amazon's kind of in good standing because effectively it's a tax write-off for the rest of Amazon.
I was going to say they have a lot of money to work with.
Right, like no, this is a fact, and this has been told to me that like effectively Amazon runs Amazon Prime Video not out of profit, but well, one, Jeff Bezos likes being in Hollywood, like
Yeah.
that's a fact. Two, it's a great soak for it being written off as a loss for the rest of the company.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that it's in a better position than a lot of these other companies that only have the service. But with a lot of lesser streamers, I think that you're already seeing some consolidation. There's a lot of indicators that certain streaming services may not survive. Netflix might be profitable now, but I don't know. Some of the behavior during the strike has made me kind of wonder how much their actual financials are.
They've emerged as kind of a villain. I mean, like for how prevalent they are in all of our homes and stuff, and like how
Mhm.
they seem to have a dominant position. But suddenly, like, I don't know, man. It doesn't. Yeah. What about reality TV supplanting the scripted show?
I think you're gonna like they tried to do that in the 90s and early 2000s. Um, like they tried, but eventually everyone went back to scripted.
Yeah.
Like you hear this described in The Disaster Artist by Greg Sestero. Like one of the reasons why his career was floundering in the late 90s was specifically because of the huge uptick in reality TV as a result of MTV. And that meant that, like, you know, he had to say yes to Tommy Wiseau's movie. But anyway, there might be an uptick, but eventually people kind of get sick of it, I think. You know, it's one of those things like you got to be in a certain state of mind to enjoy it, but eventually it's just like you just kind of look at yourself one day and you're like, dear God, do I really want to be watching this for the rest of my life?
Yeah. We need stories. Can you imagine a future where like there are other foreign hubs that are smaller versions of Hollywood and Hollywood is like massively diminished, or are they too locked in as the dominant?
Hollywood is locked in, but a lot of that is contingent on the power of the State Department. We are already seeing kind of America in decline in a lot of aspects.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be surprised to see more hubs like Korea kind of grow. I mean, you're already seeing this. Like, it's kind of parallel to what you're seeing in Asia Pacific, where everything used to be super unilateral, but now America is bringing in Australia, Japan, South Korea, and other local
entertainment
allies.
Multipolarity. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a much better world. In all fairness, I think that's a more just world when it comes to entertainment. I don't believe that America should speak for everyone in the world. God knows we aren't great at it.
Yeah.
God, that reminds me a little bit. I went to Japan recently, and I remember we went to this one place, and I picked up a samurai sword, and like one of the local people just looked at me and said Tom Cruise, and we both laughed really hard.
Oh man.
Wow. Yeah, but it's just like a lot of that I think is just down to the fact that Americans can kind of get pig-headed. A lot of the times they just kind of wander in, not doing their homework, and then expect to kind of just be like, okay, we'll do it this way. Which is exactly how Walmart failed in Germany.
Man, that's a great way to end this. Kevin Fox, thanks for coming. This was like one of my favorite episodes ever. I've done like 160 of these things. I've learned a lot, and
yeah.
I think the listeners have too. Where can people find you on like Twitter or anything like that?
Yeah, I go under Mishigrim K, MICHIGRIMK on Twitter.com. I also have my website, KevinClarkFox@gmail.com. In about 2 years, you'll see a video game that I wrote on. So, but I can't talk about it yet. But
look forward to
yeah,
it.
you can find me on Twitter, or X, as it's now unfortunately known.
Another narcissistic brand change.
Yes. It just keeps on happening. What is going on?
Yeah, something's broken. Okay, that's great. I'll throw those contact points in the show notes too.
All right.
This is fun, man. Thank you.
Yeah, great chatting with you.
Yeah, likewise. All right.
All right. Have a good one.